Nayib Bukele carried out a true revolution in his country, putting so many criminals behind bars that it almost sounds like a wild story. MS-13, however, was not the only cartel to mess with the wrong enemy. For example, the Mexican Sinaloa cartel, which provoked the fury of the United States, leading to its downfall. Joaquin Archivaldo Guzman Loera was born on April 4, 1957, in the small community of La Tuna, in the municipality of Badiraguato, Sinaloa, Mexico. He grew up in a humble family of farmers, with his father supposedly involved in cultivating opioid plants. During his childhood, Guzman endured his father's harsh punishments, but also helped him grow and sell herbs and flowers. Without access to formal education, he dropped out in the 3rd grade and was considered functionally illiterate. From an early age, Guzman showed initiative. Noticing that his father spent profits on booze and women, he created his own marijuana plot at 15, helping support his family. During adolescence, he was nicknamed El Chapo, a nod to his short stature and stocky build. With few options in his homeland, Guzman entered organized crime through an uncle, Pedro Aviles Perez, a pioneer in Mexican drug trafficking. By 20, he was already involved in larger operations, working as a subordinate to Hector Palma Salazar, helping smuggle substances into the United States. During the 1980s, Guzman worked directly for Miguel Angel Felix Gallardo, leader of the Guadalajara cartel. He coordinated the transport of illegal substances by land, sea, and air. There, he stood out for his organization and violence. Anyone who delayed a shipment paid with their life. With Felix Gallardo's arrest in 1989, the Guadalajara cartel was divided into regional factions. Guzman, together with Hector Palma and Ismael El Mayo Zambada, formed the Sinaloa cartel. He implemented logistical innovations such as using underground tunnels to cross the border and shipping substances hidden in cans of peppers. These strategies allowed him to outpace rivals and build one of the largest drug empires in history. Between 2009 and 2013, Guzman was ranked by Forbes magazine as one of the most powerful people in the world. The United States Drug Enforcement Department estimated that his influence and wealth rivaled those of Pablo Escobar. Guzman's consolidation in trafficking was marked by violent conflicts. One of the most notorious disputes was against the Tijuana cartel, led by the Arellano Felix brothers. In 1993, in an attempt to assassinate Guzman at the Guadalajara airport, gunmen from the Tijuana cartel mistakenly killed Cardinal Juan Jesus Posadas Ocampo, an event that put drug trafficking in the national and international spotlight. After the incident, Guzman fled to Guatemala but was captured and extradited to Mexico. Sentenced to 20 years in prison for trafficking, he was sent to the maximum security prison of Puente Grande. In 2001, Guzman escaped from Puente Grande, supposedly hidden in a laundry cart. This escape was facilitated by massive bribes, exposing the high levels of corruption in the Mexican prison system. Outside prison, he rebuilt his influence, consolidating the Sinaloa cartel as the largest supplier of illegal substances to the United States. During his freedom, Guzman expanded operations to include other substances causing greater chemical dependence and formed alliances with Colombian cartels, controlling the entire production and distribution process. He also took advantage of the collapse of other cartels to expand his territory. In 2004, Guzman was captured in Mazatlan in a coordinated operation between the Mexican Navy and United States agencies. His arrest was celebrated as a major success, but in July of 2015, he escaped again, this time through a sophisticated tunnel of 1.5 kilometers that connected his cell to a house outside the prison. The tunnel had lighting, ventilation, and a motorized rail. Guzman's second escape was a blow to the Mexican government, but in January of 2016 he was recaptured in Los Mochis, Sinaloa. This time he was immediately extradited to the United States, where he faced charges in multiple states, including trafficking, money laundering, and homicide. Guzman's trial in New York in 2019 revealed impressive details of his criminal operation, including bribes to high-ranking officials and his international distribution network. He was sentenced to life imprisonment and sent to the ADX Florence Lawrence Supermax prison in Colorado. Guzman was married at least 4 times and had more than 15 children. His most well-known wife, Emma Coronel Aispuro, was arrested in 2021 for helping with his operations and escapes. His sons, known as Los Chapitos, continue to lead factions of the Sinaloa cartel in an attempt to maintain their father's legacy in drug trafficking. Joaquin Guzman symbolizes both the power and the downfall of the great drug lords. His rise and repeated falls demonstrate the fragility of a life of crime, especially when challenging a superpower like the United States. Although El Chapo is imprisoned, the Sinaloa cartel remains a threat, reminding us that the war against crime is an endless battle. For a long time, El Salvador was a lawless territory. The population lived at the mercy of one of the most feared gangs in the world, the Mara Salvatrucha 13, Mississippi 13, and its rival Barrio 18. Together, these criminal organizations not only controlled entire neighborhoods but also set the rules. Anyone who dared challenge them suffered the worst consequences. Extortion was part of everyday life. Small shopkeepers paid a weekly fee to ensure their businesses would not be attacked. Young people were forcibly recruited. Entire families abandoned their homes to escape the violence. Homicide rates were so high that in 2015, El Salvador was considered the most violent country in the world, with a rate of 107 homicides per 100,000 inhabitants. For decades, successive governments tried to contain the gangs with police operations, but the criminals were always one step ahead, until one man completely changed the game. His name, Nayib Bukele. Nayib Bukele was an advertising businessman when he entered politics. He passed through the mayorship of San Salvador and quickly became the most popular political figure in the country. Young, irreverent, and adept at using social media to connect with the population, he sold himself as the only hope against corruption and organized crime. In 2019, he was elected president with 53% of the vote, promising to do what no other government had achieved: end the gang's dominion. Bukele's plan was not just to toughen the fight against crime. He wanted to wipe MS-13 off the map. His government launched the Territorial Control Plan, a 7-phase project that involved militarizing neighborhoods dominated by criminals, cutting off communications inside prisons, and blocking any flow of money that sustained the gang's activities. The strategy began to work. The number of murders started to fall, but the criminals were restless, and in 2022, they decided to give a brutal response. In March of 2022, after 3 years of a fierce offensive against the gangs, El Salvador witnessed retaliation like never before. In just 3 days, 87 people were murdered. It was a clear warning. MS-13 would not cede power without a fight. The attack left the population terrified, but Bukele, instead of backing down, doubled down. The next day, he declared a national state of emergency, suspending constitutional guarantees such as the right to defense, privacy, and freedom of association. The army and the police were ordered to arrest anyone suspected of involvement with gangs. What happened from that moment on was an unprecedented purge in El Salvador's history. The streets once controlled by gangs were taken over by heavily armed soldiers. Entire neighborhoods were cordoned off, preventing any attempt to flee. In a few months, more than 84,000 suspects were arrested, among them thousands of members of MS-13 and Barrio 18. Bukele wanted to ensure these arrests would not be temporary, so he announced the construction of the Center for Confinement of Terrorists, the CECOT, a supermax mega prison with capacity for 40,000 inmates. Shocking images released by the government showed thousands of prisoners, tattooed from head to toe, being transported without clothes and handcuffed, their heads lowered. Inside the prison, there is no contact with the outside world, and the conditions are described as the harshest ever seen. The message was clear: whoever defies the state will never see the light of day again. The results were impressive. The homicide rate plummeted, reaching 1.9 per 100,000 inhabitants in 2024, one of the lowest in the Americas. But while Bukele was celebrated by the majority of the population, a denunciation began gaining strength behind the scenes. In 2021, the newspaper El Faro published an explosive report. Nayib Bukele's government was allegedly negotiating secretly with MS-13 and Barrio 18 to reduce violence. The evidence was compelling. Audios, documents, and visitation records indicated that members of the government's upper echelon entered maximum security prisons to meet with gang leaders. During these meetings, the criminals made demands, such as better conditions in prisons and benefits for their members on the outside. Investigators discovered that Bukele's government suspended police operations against certain gang leaders and even financed small businesses for MS-13 members in exchange for a drastic reduction in murders. The report was an international scandal, but inside El Salvador, nothing changed. The population, which had previously lived in terror, did not care about the means, only the results. For most Salvadorans, if Bukele made a pact to save lives, then he did what was necessary. The president himself vehemently denied the accusations and mocked journalists, posting photos of prisoners crammed into cells as proof that there was no negotiation whatsoever. The truth about this supposed pact may never be fully revealed, but regardless of any agreement, the undeniable fact is that MS-13 was crushed. Bukele's war against the gangs brought peace to a country that had lived in chaos, but it also raised questions. How long can a government suspend basic rights in the name of security? NGOs and human rights groups denounce abuses committed by the government, such as arrests without evidence, severe punishments inside prisons, and detentions of innocent people just for having tattoos. But inside the country, Bukele's popularity remains at impressive levels. He won re-election with 85% of the vote, a record in El Salvador's history. And for those who question his approach, Bukele always has a ready answer. Do you prefer the human rights of criminals or the freedom of the people? For most Salvadorans, the answer has already been given. Now Bukele faces a new challenge, maintaining security without relying on a permanent state of emergency. After all, he cannot govern with mass imprisonment forever. In addition, the world watches with curiosity to see whether his model can be replicated in other countries plagued by crime. Governments in places like Ecuador and Colombia have already shown interest in following his steps. But one thing is certain, the MS-13 cartels chose the wrong enemy. They challenged a man who did not hesitate to take this war to its ultimate consequences. And now, for those who once ruled the country through fear, the only possible destination is oblivion. In the 1990s, Mexico was going through a period of transition. While the cartels of illicit substances expanded, the government tried to control a silent war growing behind the scenes. But no one was prepared for what was to come. It was in this scenario that Los Zetas were born, one of the most violent criminal groups in Mexico's history. Unlike traditional cartels, which were based on alliances and bribes, the Zetas were formed by highly trained ex-soldiers ready to turn the country into their battlefield. They did not negotiate, did not make deals, and had no limits. For the Zetas, violence was not just a tool, it was their very trademark. But when you challenge the wrong enemies, the fall can be as brutal as the rise. The birth of the Zetas was different from any other Mexican cartel. It all began in the late 1990s when Arturo Guzman de Sena, an elite soldier in the Mexican army, decided to betray his country and ally himself with the powerful Gulf Cartel. The idea was simple. Instead of recruiting ordinary criminals, the cartel's leaders would bring in trained soldiers to protect their interests. De Sena recruited more than 30 ex-military men, all specialized in special operations, guerrilla warfare, and urban combat. The group was named Los Zetas, a reference to the radio code used by commanders of the Mexican Federal Police, and that's when the terror began. With elite training and heavy weaponry, the Zetas quickly ceased to be just bodyguards. They began taking on executions, extortion, and control of entire territories. Within a few years, they became more powerful than the Gulf Cartel itself, but too much power always exacts a price. In 2010, the Zetas decided they no longer needed the Gulf Cartel. They wanted to rule alone. It was the start of one of the bloodiest wars in Mexico's history. The former allies became mortal enemies. The streets of cities like Nuevo Laredo, Tamaulipas, and Veracruz turned into battlefields. Entire neighborhoods became war zones, with disputes over territory and displays of force that terrorized the population. But while they fought with the Gulf Cartel, the Zetas made a fatal mistake. They began attacking the Mexican government itself and drew the attention of the United States, and that would change everything. Until that moment, Mexican cartels were used to dealing with corruption and impunity. Bribes ensured that many operations continued without interference. But the Zetas went too far. They began attacking Mexican police, soldiers, and even politicians. When entire cities were ruled by fear, the government had no choice. It asked the United States for help. The response was swift. The American government classified the Zetas as one of the most dangerous criminal groups in the world. The FBI, DEA, and ATF swung into action, monitoring every move of the cartel. The Zetas' empire was about to crumble. With United States intelligence and Mexico's military strength, a new phase of the war began. The United States used drones, satellites, and secret operations to map the Zetas' movements. Meanwhile, the Mexican army intensified attacks, arresting and eliminating the cartel's main leaders. The blows were devastating. In 2012, Heriberto Lascano, one of the Zetas' leaders, was eliminated by the Mexican army. In 2013, Miguel Ángel Trevino Morales, the infamous Z40, was captured in a special operation. In 2015, Omar Trevino Morales, Z42, was arrested, leaving the cartel even more weakened. Without leadership, the Zetas began to fragment. Internal factions entered into conflict, and the once feared cartel became a disorganized group with leaders disputing what remained of the empire. But the final blow was still to come. From 2016 onward, the Zetas were no longer what they once were. The cartel was divided and surrounded by enemies. The Mexican government, the United States, and even other cartels like the CJNG and the Sinaloa cartel had set their sights on its destruction. The great irony was that the very terror and extreme violence the Zetas used to grow caused their destruction. While traditional cartels made deals to survive, the Zetas created too many enemies. Military operations continued to dismantle the cartel, and each new attack was a mortal blow. What was once the most violent cartel in Mexico was now reduced to small, leaderless groups. The last leaders of the Zetas were arrested or eliminated. The cartel that challenged governments, rival cartels, and even the United States was now just a ghost of the past. Today, the Zetas are no longer the dominant force they once were, but their impact on Mexico and on the world of crime will never be forgotten. They were responsible for a wave of violence that changed how the country fights organized crime. More than that, they proved that when you mess with the wrong enemies, the fall can be even more brutal than the rise. Do not forget to subscribe to watch more videos like this.